On a quiet, sun-soaked afternoon, Sarah found herself alone on the side of the road, a flat tire keeping her from reaching her destination. She had been driving for hours, and the tire had given out unexpectedly, miles away from the nearest gas station or help. The wind rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, but the only sound Sarah could hear was her heartbeat, quickening with the frustration and uncertainty of the situation. She tried her best to remain calm, but with no cell service, no one to call, and no spare tire knowledge, she felt helpless. She looked around, hoping to see a friendly face or passing car, but the road remained empty. She kicked the tire lightly, as if it would miraculously fix itself, but nothing changed. Sweat gathered on her forehead as she crouched down to examine the tire again, knowing she didn't have the right tools or experience to get it fixed. Her attempts were futile, and the sinking feeling in her stomach only deepened. Just as she thought of trying to walk to the nearest town, a car appeared in the distance, its engine humming steadily. She watched as the vehicle grew closer, her heart lifting in anticipation. It was a rare sight. There were hardly any cars on this stretch of the road. The car slowed down as it approached, and Sarah's eyes widened in relief. Maybe this person could help her. The car came to a full stop next to her, and the window rolled down. A man, with a kind expression and a calm demeanor, looked out at her. He was smiling, and his eyes met hers with genuine concern. He wasn't in a rush, taking the moment to assess the situation before speaking. "Looks like you're having some trouble there," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "Need some help with that tire?" Sarah hesitated at first. She wasn't sure about accepting help from a stranger, especially with how vulnerable the situation made her feel. But there was something about his kindness that made her trust him almost immediately. She nodded, and before she could respond, the man had already stepped out of his car, walking towards her. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it for you," he said, bending down to inspect the tire. His presence was calm, not hurried, as though he had all the time in the world. He wasn't judging her for not knowing how to fix it, nor was he impatient. Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. As he worked, Sarah stood back, watching him move with ease and confidence. It was clear he knew exactly what he was doing. While he took care of the tire, they exchanged small talk. Sarah mentioned she was on her way to visit an old friend, and he shared that he was just passing through on his way home. There was no rush, no need to fill the silence with unnecessary words, and that made the whole situation feel less stressful. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden light on the road. Sarah thought to herself that she had never been so grateful for a kind stranger. As the man loosened the lug nuts and lifted the car, she couldn't help but think that this simple act of kindness was changing her mood for the better. This moment, which had started with frustration and worry, was slowly transforming into one of unexpected warmth. As the man worked on the tire, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and unease. She was grateful for his help. After all, she was stuck on the side of the road, unsure of what to do next. But there was something about the situation that left her feeling a little uncomfortable. She hadn't planned on needing anyone's help, especially not from a stranger. Yet here she was, relying on him to fix her tire. She tried to push aside her unease by focusing on the task at hand. The man seemed to know exactly what he was doing. His movements were precise, calm, and confident as he worked. He wasn't rushing or making her feel like she was a burden. He simply did the work, his hands steady, his focus on the task rather than the small talk they had started exchanging. His casual nature helped put her at ease, even though there was still a lingering sense of vulnerability. Sarah's thoughts drifted to how she had found herself in this situation in the first place. She had been on a long drive, one she had looked forward to for weeks, but now, here she was, stranded, far from help. She hadn't even realized her tire was losing air until it was too late. It was just one of those things, she thought, that happened out of nowhere. She glanced at the man, wondering what had led him to stop for her. "Do you drive this road often?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation going and distract herself from the awkwardness she felt. The man looked up from his work for a moment, a small smile on his face. "Not really," he replied, wiping a bit of sweat from his forehead. "I was just passing through. The timing just worked out, I guess." Sarah nodded. There was something simple and reassuring about his response. It wasn't like he had gone out of his way to help her, but it felt like fate had aligned just enough for him to be in the right place at the right time. She found herself silently hoping that good things happened when people helped others, like this moment, and maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. As the man continued to work, Sarah found herself studying him more closely. He had an easygoing demeanor that made her feel safe despite the situation. His clothes were simple, worn jeans, a t-shirt, and sneakers, but he didn't look out of place here. His movements were fluid, not hurried, and he appeared completely unbothered by the setting. In contrast, Sarah was still a little tense. She couldn't help but wonder if she would have been able to help herself, had she known what to do. The man spoke again, breaking her thoughts. "So, what brings you out here?" Sarah felt a little more comfortable now, the awkwardness melting away as the conversation picked up. "Visiting an old friend," she replied with a smile. "We haven't seen each other in years." He nodded. "That sounds nice. I bet it'll be great catching up." His words were light, unassuming. He didn't seem to be asking about her life for any specific reason, just to keep the conversation flowing. It felt nice to talk to someone who didn't want anything from her, just wanted to help and make sure she was okay. As the tire finally came loose and the man moved to put the spare in place, Sarah let out a quiet sigh of relief. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding in, but now, with the task almost finished, she felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. She glanced at the man one more time, her gratitude clear in her smile. In that moment, she realized that sometimes it's not just the help that counts, it's the kindness that comes with it. Just as the man tightened the last lug nut on the tire, a car appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the early evening light. Sarah, who had been standing back and watching, felt a small knot form in her stomach. The car was moving at a normal speed, but something about its presence made her feel uneasy. She looked at the man, who had already finished the task, his hands wiping off the grease as he stepped back, and admired his work. The approaching car slowed down as it neared their location, and Sarah couldn't help but notice the police siren blinking on top of the vehicle. Her heart skipped a beat. The police. Was there something wrong with what they were doing? Maybe someone had called about the car being on the side of the road, and now they were here to check things out. She felt an odd sense of dread growing in her chest, though she wasn't sure why. The police car came to a complete stop a few feet away, and the officer behind the wheel rolled down his window. He gave a polite but sharp nod as his eyes scanned the scene. Sarah, unsure of what to expect, took a step back. The man, who had been calm throughout their entire interaction, seemed to stand a little straighter, his posture shifting slightly as the officer got out of the car. "Is everything all right here?" the officer asked, his voice firm yet not unkind. He looked directly at Sarah, taking in the scene with a quick glance. There was no sign of an emergency or any apparent danger, but Sarah could feel the tension rising. She opened her mouth to explain that everything was fine, but before she could speak, the officer's gaze shifted to the man. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in the stranger's appearance, scanning him with a keen interest. "You're helping her with the tire?" he asked, his voice holding a slight tone of suspicion. The man nodded, maintaining his calm demeanor. "Yes, officer. Just helping her out. Her tire went flat, and I stopped to give her a hand." Sarah could feel the officer's eyes lingering on the man, and she couldn't quite place the look he had on his face. It was as if he was trying to decide whether to believe the man's story. She could feel the growing tension, the air thickening as the officer stepped a little closer to them both. The officer then turned his attention back to Sarah, asking her if she had called anyone for roadside assistance or if she was going to handle it herself. Sarah, still somewhat shocked by the sudden appearance of the police, answered quickly, "No, I was just trying to fix it myself. but he stopped and helped me." The officer nodded, though his face didn't change much. He didn't seem convinced, but at the same time, he didn't press further. His gaze returned to the man. There was a slight pause, and for a moment, Sarah felt like the situation was about to take a turn. The officer didn't look like he was ready to leave just yet. As Sarah waited for the officer's next move, she glanced at the man who had helped her. He stood still, calm as ever, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of tension she hadn't noticed before. The situation felt heavier than it needed to be, but neither of them seemed to want to escalate it. Sarah's mind raced as she wondered what was really going on. Why did the officer seem so suspicious? Why wasn't he believing their story at face value? The officer hesitated, then finally spoke again. "All right, just making sure everything's in order. Stay safe out here," he said, his tone softening slightly. With that, he turned and headed back to his patrol car, not saying anything more. The engine revved as the car pulled away, and soon, the only sounds that filled the quiet evening were the distant hum of the police car driving off into the distance. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart was still racing, and she could feel the tension slowly begin to drain from her shoulders. What had just happened? Everything had seemed fine just a moment ago, but now she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the air. She looked over at the man who had helped her. He was wiping his hands on a rag, clearly unaffected by the police encounter. But Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was this just a simple misunderstanding, or was there more to this than met the eye? As the police car drove off, Sarah stood there for a moment, still processing the strange interaction. She had been caught off guard by the officer's suspicion, but now that he was gone, a sense of calm started to return. The man, who had been her unexpected helper, was finishing up his work on the tire, completely unaffected by the situation. His movements were smooth and confident, as though the brief encounter with the police had been nothing more than a fleeting moment. Sarah, still trying to shake off the tension, took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Thank you again for helping me," she said, her voice a bit shaky but sincere. "I really appreciate it. I don't know what I would have done without you." The man smiled at her, wiping his hands on the rag he had been using. "No problem. I'm just glad I could help," he said with a relaxed tone. "It's not every day you get to stop and actually make a difference, you know." His words made Sarah feel a little lighter. She had been so focused on the awkwardness of the situation, the unspoken tension with the officer, that she hadn't really taken a moment to appreciate the kindness that had brought her to this point. The man had simply seen someone in need and decided to help, without hesitation. She couldn't help but admire that. As he finished tightening the last lug nut, Sarah stepped back, her gaze drifting down the road. The whole experience had been unsettling in a way she hadn't expected. She had no idea why the officer had acted so suspiciously toward the man. He had been nothing but helpful. She knew that not every situation could be explained away easily, but it still felt off. "Are you sure you're all right?" the man asked, noticing the distant look on her face. "I know that was a little weird with the officer." Sarah nodded slowly, trying to shake off the last remnants of her discomfort. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little shaken up, I guess. I don't know why the officer acted that way. I mean, you were just helping me. I wasn't expecting that kind of response." The man shrugged, his expression neutral. "Sometimes people see things differently. It's unfortunate, but it happens." His calmness was reassuring. Sarah wasn't sure how she would have reacted if the roles had been reversed, but his composed attitude made her feel like it wasn't the end of the world. It was just a misunderstanding. Maybe the officer had been having a bad day, or maybe he was just doing his job, being cautious. Whatever the reason, Sarah knew the man meant no harm, and she felt a sense of gratitude for his help. "So, what's next for you?" Sarah asked, trying to bring the conversation back to normal. "I mean, I can't imagine you just stop to help someone every day." The man chuckled lightly. "Not exactly. I was just passing through, heading home, but I'm always happy to help out when I can. It's just the right thing to do. Sarah smiled at his words. There was something refreshing about his no-nonsense attitude, as though he didn't expect anything in return for doing a good deed. He didn't need praise or recognition. He just did what he could when he could. "Well, I can't thank you enough," Sarah said. "Is there anything I can do for you? I mean, if I'm ever in a position to return the favor, I'd love to." He shook his head with a friendly smile. "No need. Just take care of yourself, and if you see someone else in need, maybe pay it forward. That's all anyone can really do." Sarah nodded, her heart warmed by the simple sentiment. She felt an odd sense of closure. The unsettling encounter with the officer had passed, and what remained was a genuine moment of kindness. As the man climbed back into his car, Sarah felt a renewed sense of trust in the goodness of people. Maybe the world wasn't so bad after all. With the tire fixed and the awkwardness behind her, Sarah got into her car, ready to continue her journey. She gave the man a final wave before driving off, feeling lighter than she had in hours. There was a quiet peace in knowing that sometimes the smallest gestures could make the biggest difference. As Sarah drove down the road, the events of the last hour kept replaying in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that things had gone a little sideways when the police showed up. It wasn't just the officer's questions or the strange way he had looked at the man who helped her. It was the feeling of being judged for something that didn't seem like it should be judged at all. She had simply been stranded on the side of the road, a situation that could have happened to anyone, anywhere. But for some reason, it felt like she was being scrutinized more than she should have been. The man had been nothing but kind, and his calm, unbothered demeanor had helped Sarah through a stressful moment. She felt grateful, but at the same time, there was a lingering thought in her mind that maybe this experience wasn't just about a flat tire. Maybe it had something to do with how people saw others, how assumptions could be made quickly and without reason. As she drove, her thoughts drifted to the man's earlier words. "It's unfortunate, but it happens." His simple response had left her with something to think about. It wasn't just the police officer who had made assumptions. It was the world, in general, making quick judgments about people based on what they looked like or what others might have said about them. It was a harsh reality that Sarah was reminded of today. But the more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized how much that moment had changed her perspective. The man's kindness had shown through, not just in his actions, but in his words. "Just take care of yourself, and if you see someone else in need, maybe pay it forward." That simple sentiment had stuck with her. It was a reminder that the world wasn't full of obstacles, but of opportunities to make things better for others, just as the man had done for her. Sarah found herself driving slower now, the car humming steadily beneath her as she tried to organize her thoughts. She thought about how often people stayed in their own little bubbles, afraid to step outside of their comfort zones and help someone in need. It was easier to ignore the world around us than to be involved, and that was something that had always bothered her. But now, she realized that maybe it didn't have to be complicated. Sometimes, help was as simple as offering a hand when someone needed it the most. She thought about the officer again. Maybe he wasn't just suspicious of the man because of his appearance, but because he had seen too many situations where things weren't what they seemed. She understood that. He was just doing his job. But the man, he had seen someone stranded and just stopped to help. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make any assumptions. He just helped. As Sarah neared her friend's house, the sunset casting a soft glow over the horizon, she found herself feeling lighter. She had been so focused on her own discomfort that she hadn't fully realized how much the experience had changed her. She wasn't just thankful for the man's help anymore. She was thankful for the lesson it taught her. It wasn't about how others viewed you or how they judged you. It was about what you did with the opportunities in front of you. And in that moment, she decided that the next time she saw someone in need, she wouldn't hesitate. She would act, just like the man had. The road ahead seemed less daunting now, her mind clearer than it had been all day. She had learned something today, something important. And with that, She could let go of the discomfort and focus on what truly mattered: kindness, compassion, and paying it forward when the chance arose. As Sarah continued on her drive, the earlier encounter kept lingering in her thoughts, but in a different way now. What had initially felt like a tense moment had slowly transformed into something more meaningful. The man who had stopped to help her wasn't just someone who had changed her tire. He had reminded her of the simple yet powerful impact that a small act of kindness could have. It wasn't about what anyone else thought. It was about what she did in that moment and how it could change the course of someone's day. By the time she reached her friend's house, the weight of the afternoon had begun to lift. Her thoughts were still a little scattered, but in a good way. She was thinking about things more deeply now. She parked her car, took a deep breath, and stepped out, stretching her legs after the long drive. The familiar surroundings of her friend's home, the warm light spilling through the windows, made her feel a little more at peace. Her friend, Hannah, greeted her at the door with a wide smile. "You made it," she said, pulling Sarah into a hug. Sarah smiled, but her mind was still half on the road, half on the man she had met earlier. "Yeah, just got here," Sarah replied, stepping inside. "But I had a bit of a strange encounter on the way here." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what happened?" Sarah took a seat on the couch and began recounting the events. She told her friend about the flat tire, how the man had stopped to help, and how the police had arrived out of nowhere. She explained how the officer had acted strangely toward the man and how she had felt a little uncomfortable in the situation, but how the man had handled it all so calmly. As Sarah spoke, she couldn't help but notice how much clearer she felt telling the story. She wasn't just recounting a strange moment. She was reflecting on what it had taught her. "You know, I thought the whole situation was going to be a disaster," Sarah said. "But the way he helped, and the way he didn't let anything rattle them, it was a reminder of how much we judge people, even when we shouldn't." Hannah nodded, clearly interested in what Sarah was saying. "Yeah, it's easy to make assumptions, especially when we don't know the full story. But it sounds like this guy was just trying to do the right thing." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "And it really made me think about how much we take kindness for granted. We all get so caught up in our own lives that we forget how a simple gesture can make a difference. He didn't need anything in return. He just helped because it was the right thing to do." The conversation shifted, and for the rest of the evening, Sarah felt lighter. Her visit with Hannah was just what she needed to take her mind off the earlier events. But as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't help but smile to herself. The man's words had stuck with her, and in a way, they had changed her. If you see someone else in need, maybe pay it forward. It was such a simple idea, but it carried so much weight. Sarah thought about all the times she had passed by people who needed help, convincing herself that it wasn't her problem or that someone else would take care of it. But now, she realized that every moment was an opportunity. Every time she saw someone in need, it was a chance to be a part of something better. It didn't matter if the world saw her or anyone else. What mattered was the choices she made. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. The next time someone needed help, she wouldn't hesitate. The world could be as uncertain as it wanted to be, but kindness didn't need to be complicated. It was something she could offer, something that could make a difference, just like it had for her that day. The world might not always be easy, but she could still find ways to make it a little better, one small act of kindness at a time. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of clarity that she hadn't felt in a while. She had always known that kindness mattered, but after the strange encounter on the road, she saw it in a new light. It wasn't just about helping others when it was convenient or when you felt like it. It was about being there for someone in the moments when they needed it most, even when it wasn't easy. She remembered the man from the day before, the way he had helped her without a second thought, and how his calm, steady presence had made all the difference in an otherwise tense situation. After breakfast, Sarah decided to take a walk outside, letting the morning sun warm her face. As she strolled down the street, she thought about the day ahead. She had come to visit her friend to relax and unwind, but now, after everything that had happened, she couldn't stop thinking about how she could carry the lessons from yesterday into her daily life. She stopped at a small cafe on the corner, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Sarah hadn't planned on stopping, but something about the cozy atmosphere pulled her in. As she stood in line, she noticed a woman ahead of her, struggling with her wallet, her hands shaking as she tried to find the exact change for her coffee. The woman's face was flushed with embarrassment, and she kept apologizing to the barista. Sarah could tell that the woman was trying not to make a big deal out of it, but it was clear that she was flustered. Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward, a smile on her face. "Hey, don't worry about it," she said. "I've got it." The woman looked up, surprised. "Oh no, I couldn't." "It's no trouble," Sarah insisted, reaching for her wallet. "Please, let me." The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded gratefully. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means." Sarah paid for the woman's coffee, and as she handed the barista the money, she realized how good it felt to just help. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was enough to make someone's day a little brighter. She smiled as the woman left, her gratitude clear in the way she held her cup. As Sarah sat down at one of the cafe tables with her own coffee, she couldn't help but reflect on the small act of kindness she had just extended. It was a simple thing, really, but it felt like a small victory. It wasn't about the money, and it wasn't about getting recognition. It was about doing something without expecting anything in return, just like the man had done for her the day before. Sometimes, those little moments could have the biggest impact. The thought of paying it forward lingered in Sarah's mind throughout the rest of the day. She spent the afternoon with her friend, enjoying the laughter and easy conversation that came with being around someone who understood her. But in the back of her mind, she was more aware than ever of how much kindness there was in the world, if only people were willing to notice it. As she got ready to leave Hannah's house later that evening, Sarah felt a shift within herself. She wasn't just going to let the lessons from that strange, enlightening day fade into the background. She was going to make a conscious effort to be kind, to reach out when others needed help, to offer support when it was least expected. She wasn't going to wait for the right moment anymore. She was going to create those moments. As Sarah drove home, the night sky stretching wide above her, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The world might not always make sense, and it certainly wasn't always easy, but she knew one thing for sure. Kindness, even in the smallest form, had the power to change everything. And as long as she kept paying it forward, she would always be part of something better, something that could make a real difference. The days that followed felt different for Sarah. The small act of kindness she had experienced on the side of the road had rippled through her life in ways she hadn't expected. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who had helped her, how he had simply done the right thing without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. His quiet strength, his calm confidence in a situation that could have easily been uncomfortable, stayed with her. She found herself reflecting on how much power a simple, genuine act of kindness could have in the world. It wasn't just about paying for someone's coffee or helping change a flat tire. It was about being present, being there for others when they needed help most. Sarah began to notice the small opportunities for kindness that existed all around her. At work,